Many times people ask, why should we work together? Is this some kind of business practice? We want to be more efficient, more effective? Is it somebody's private agenda? What are you trying to do? Why are we working together? There are many, many reasons why we work together. Of course, because God was living outside of time, in eternity, in community. He created us to live in community because He restores relationships in the body of Christ, and therefore we are community witness. But beyond that, there's the amazing fact that witness in the community, in society around us, is not an event. It is a process. And if it's a process, who is involved? Read, for example, what Jesus says in Matthew 13. Jesus starts with this wonderful story about the farmer who goes out in the field, clearing the stones, sowing, watering, then eventually reaping. The story of the farmer is very, very well known. What is not very often discussed is the fact that in John chapter 4, Jesus used exactly the same image again. For example, in the middle of the story of the Samaritan woman, this is where this amazing encounter occurs between Jesus and the woman of Samaria at the well. Disciples come back from town with food. They say to him, well, we have the food, aren't you going to eat? And he says, my food is to do the will of the Father. I want you to open your eyes, look at the fields around here, white unto harvest. This is a very famous missionary verse. Usually stop talking at that point. Most important verses follow. Then Jesus says, look, fellows, he's speaking to his disciples. Remember, these are the people he sent out 2 by 2 and the 70. Be careful. I sent you out to reap a harvest where you never even lifted a finger. Others had done the hard and dirty work in the heat of the day. You had the privilege of entering into their labors, so that he who sows and he who reaps may rejoice together. The body of Christ must work together because we're given different gifts. You may be a sower, you may be a reaper, you may be a discipler, you may be clearing stones, you may be watering. And just a final observation, if you think it's unique, this passage from John 4, look at 1 Corinthians 3. This is the famous passage where Paul is talking about Apollos and about his work and so forth. And he says, why is there all this controversy about who's most important? He said, look at me. I did sowing. Apollos watered. God gives the increase. Then Paul, just to make his point, goes on and says, by the way, while we're talking about this, let me tell you what God thinks. God makes no difference between the sower and the reaper. Now we understand, friends, as we think about collaboration, we think about working together. Now we understand why Jesus never one time in the 4 Gospels ever mentions the word success. But he relentlessly talks about faithfulness. Because in the body of Christ, whatever alliance or partnership or cooperation you're trying to bring together, each person has a part. We need to celebrate the parts. But the person who does the reaping certainly must know in the intention of the person who did the sowing. They may not know the person themselves, but it's part of a plan. And so as we work together in cooperation, the whole point is try to be part of God's process of redemption, God's people working together to achieve those objectives.